Hello, I am Chris Well. I am an author, and this is me trying out this equipment for the first time, so enjoy. I thought, for no other reason than because I needed to start somewhere, I would do some reading from my new book, Too Good to Be Truman, a crime comedy. I could read you the information on the back of the cover, but that's all readily available online, and probably, in fact, there's a book trailer that I created that includes all of this information, mostly verbatim, and that's really all I have to say about that. So I'm just going to read you the first chapter from Too Good to Be Truman, and then we'll find out what the finished product looks like. Chapter 1. The man answered on the first ring. "This is Jack Carlin." Harry Truman pinched his nose to disguise his voice.
"Hello, is this the crime reporter who placed that awful Harry Truman?"
"Why, yes it is. Are you a fan of my column?"
"I have a hot tip for you. I would not trust anyone else with this."
"Yeah?" You could almost hear Carlin salivating. "What is it?"
"There's going to be a drug deal tonight at Percy Priest Lake, and I happen to know that the buyer is a major player in Nashville city government. I thought you might want to be there to take pictures and get the big scoop."
"Have you told the cops?"
"Of course not. The police would show up and scare the guys off. If you want to expose this festering corruption, you need to be out there alone."
"I see what you mean. Can you tell me when this drug deal is taking place?"
"Sometime between 10 o'clock tonight and 6 o'clock tomorrow morning."
"Can't you be more specific?"
"The council member, the buyer, is very nervous about this deal and wants to be absolutely certain nobody else is around when the deal takes place. You see, this is a black market drug of a, shall we say, a personal nature."
"You mean—"
"I'd rather not say on an unprotected line, but you just need to make sure that you are hidden..."
Turn the page.
"Hidden good and tight. If they see anyone else out there, the whole thing will fall through. But I know you can do this. You need to show all those people who say you're not fit to write on Harry Truman's toilet paper."
"They say that?"
"If you get this scoop tonight, they won't be saying it anymore."
"I didn't know they were saying that."
"Trust me, they're saying it, but I believe in you, Jack Carlin."
Truman hung up the phone. If he knew Carlin, the man would spend all night hiding in the weeds and the mud, waiting for a transaction that would never happen. His good deed done for the day, Truman got back to work. Sitting at his kitchen table, he stared at the words on the screen. This was his first novel. This was the first page of his first novel. This was the first sentence of his first novel. In fact, in the 4 months since he had embarked on his new career as a novelist, this was the sum total of his This was the sum... How do I say that? I'm going to look that up. How do you pronounce uv? O-U-V-R-E... Did you mean of definition more? Oh, actually, let's go back. I want the thing with the sound.
Uver.
Really?
Uver.
Okay. Okay, and where are you at? Okay, right. In fact, in the 4 months since he had embarked on his new career as a novelist, this was the sum total of his oeuvre. The night was dark. He had spent days staring at that sentence. He had spent sleepless nights mulling it over and over in his mind, imagining how he could reshape it, how he could enhance it, how he could expand upon it. For a period of time he toyed with adding that the night was also stormy. He had successfully talked himself out of it. And now he stared. As he stared nearly every day for the past 120 days, give or take. In the span of his career as a novelist, all 4 months of it, he had gone through some changes. From a man who would rise bright and early, eat a hearty breakfast, and gladly face the challenges of the new day, to a man who started having bourbon with his breakfast, to a man who had bourbon for breakfast. He picked up his glass and looked at it. He was almost out of breakfast. Truman went to the living room to lie on the worn couch, rest his eyes, and wait for the muse to come visit him. He thought of the muses as they were portrayed in the 1980s movie musical Xanadu. Olivia Newton-John's portrayal indicated that the muses weren't in any kind of hurry. After all, she waited, 40 years to finally do anything about Gene Kelly's dream, and she didn't do squat for the other guy. What was that actor's name? Truman would have jumped on the information superhighway to look it up, but he didn't really care, not to mention his internet had recently been cut off. As a former newspaper writer, a crime reporter for a major metropolitan newspaper, Truman knew the secret to writing was not waiting for the muse. The secret was to sit down and write. Rain or shine, inspiration or no inspiration, hell or high water. But you also needed to care, and he had a hard time caring about this book. He was relieved to hear the local postal carrier out in the hall, the wheels on the man's cart squeaking as they rolled by his door. The jangle of keys, the opening of the big metal door to the rows of mailboxes for this building. Once the sound of the ritual had finished, and the squeaking cart disappeared back down the hall, Truman dragged himself off the couch and ambled across the apartment to the door. Past the beat-up folding card table, which served as a poker table every Wednesday night, and doubled as a dinner table on the rare occasions when he entertained. Past the old television set, which, without cable, got all of 3 channels. A collection of second-hand Reader's Digest hardcovers, which held abbreviated editions of what must have originally have been some unnecessarily wordy books. And a big chair that looked more comfortable than it was. Truman cracked the door and peeked before actually exiting his apartment. Most of the neighbors on this floor were busybodies, old biddies that had outlasted their men, who now placed all their worldly affection on tiny, angry dogs that invariably thought of Truman's shoes as fire hydrants. Determining it was safe to venture out, he leaped across the hall and jammed his key in the mailbox to apartment 356. He grabbed his mail, snapped the door shut, and locked it. "Oh, Mr. Trumbull!" That would be Mrs. Gill, the middle-aged divorcee who had misheard his name during introductions. He'd never told her the difference, and now it was just awkward. He made for his apartment like he didn't hear her calling his name, or rather, didn't hear her calling the name that she called him. She intercepted him at the door. "Mr. Trumbull, how are you this afternoon?" "Afternoon? Oh, of course." After all, he had just gotten his mail. He'd wasted half the day waiting for the stupid muse to swing by, or for that matter, a visit from the will to live. He forced a smile. "I'm doing about the usual." "I was going to make chili tonight. I thought maybe you'd like to come over for dinner and have some." "As much as I'd love to, I really need to keep hammering on this book. I'm really beginning to make progress. Thanks anyway." He showed teeth, hoping it looked friendly. He squeaked through the door and shut it behind him. He really wished he'd just get a dog and be done with it. At least with the dogs, he knew where he stood. When it came to women, Truman was through with that noise. If the first divorce didn't get the message through to his thick head, the second divorce certainly did. And that third divorce just confirmed his suspicions. He was in no hurry to take auditions for ex-wife number 4. He threw the mail on the poker table and went to the cabinet for another shot of breakfast. Of course, now that he realized it was the afternoon, it was time to think about moving on to the hard stuff. Back at the table, with liquid nourishment in hand, Truman started to sift through the mail. Bill, second notice. Bill, final notice. Letter from his ex-wife, the third one. Letter from her lawyer. Here was the renewal notice from the newspaper that fired him. He folded the envelope into a lopsided paper airplane and aimed it for the wastebasket by the TV. It almost made it. He didn't need no stinking subscription. Granted, he picked up the newspaper every Tuesday without fail. He would turn right to Jack Carlin's crime column, clip it out, and throw out the rest of the newspaper unread. Then, felt tip marker in hand, Truman would write up a comprehensive list of corrections. Sometimes he'd go out on his own dime and reinvestigate some of Carlin's reporting, just to find out what actually happened. Once his assessment was complete, Truman mailed the marked-up column, along with any appendixes, to his former editor, Francis Withers. He'd done this every week for 4 months, and that idiot Carlin was still working there. Once upon a time, a good reporter was prized by a newspaper. But when the owner of this paper, Leopold Miller, got tired of his ace crime reporter digging up the truth, he sent down the word from on high to cut loose Harry Truman. There was brief talk of suggesting Truman take a sabbatical, but seeing as how these days newspapers were already wheezing their last breath before the meteor hit, management decided it would be more efficient to just cut him loose and be done with it. And once you've been cut loose, you suddenly find yourself unwelcome at every media news outlet known to man. The next envelope was from a local charity. He folded this envelope too and threw it in the general direction of the wastebasket. The clumpy paper airplane didn't fare any better than its predecessor. The next envelope bore the logo of his book publisher. Fortunately, the contracts for this book deal were too far down the line to cancel before anyone of consequence in New York heard what happened, which meant he got his severance check on a Friday and his book advance on a Monday. Truman had cashed the check pronto, before anyone in New York could think better of it. So when the members of the publishing committee changed their minds, all they could do was ask for their money back, which they had been doing for the past several weeks. Opening this envelope from the publisher now, he was greeted with the most sternly worded, "Please send back the check" letter yet. Truman went to the laptop and typed up the warmest reply he could think of. "Sirs, I was pleased to receive your recent letter. Your kind wishes and your moral support mean more to me than you could ever know. Please know that I am still working night and day on this book. By the way, if you have attempted to contact me via email, please note that I am currently on an internet blackout. A novelist needs his solitude to work. Hugs and kisses, Harry Truman." Without the wireless service, he had to search for the USB cable to connect the computer to the printer. He printed out the letter, adding his signature in his curliest handwriting. He found a yellowed envelope in the junk drawer and hand-addressed it to the editor who had replaced the one who contracted him in the first place. He licked the flap, sealed the envelope, and threw it on the table. He didn't have a stamp, so it would have to wait. Now it was time to get back to the book. No more fooling around. He called up the document and stared at where he'd left off. It was, of course, the same place he'd left off the previous time he looked. He was interrupted by an insistent banging on the apartment door. He downed the last of his breakfast, telling himself that he would have been writing the second sentence right now if not for this interruption. At the door was a small man in a dark blue suit stitched together by light blue thread. It had all the earmarks of an off-the-rack job from the outlet mall. The man had a trial-sized penciled mustache and spectacles outlined by black plastic rims. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Truman?" "Yes." "Mr. Harry Truman." Fine, what? If you're here to talk to me about religion or politics, I'm in the middle of something very important." "Mr. Truman, I am an agent with the Internal Revenue Service." "Is that so? We believe you owe us an explanation." And thus endeth Chapter 1 of Too Good to Be Truman.